Bill, I'm glad you titled your piece, your first piece on debt and taxes, um, reducing the debt again, because people tend to forget that in the 1990s, late 1990s, we actually did have control of the debt, and it was actually going down. It actually went down for a couple of years. So, what were I mean, you were highlighting the difference between then and now, and I think it's really important to make that distinction. What makes now so much more difficult about reducing the debt than it was, say, in the late 1990s?
The the whole history of the country has been with fiscal cycles. The debt's gone up, debt's gone down. And so as debt goes up now, or has the last 20 years, there's sort of good news in the background. In principle, we can control this. We have controlled the debt in the past after the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, the First and Second World Wars. Debt skyrocketed during the war and came down afterwards. In the 90s, uh, in the 80s, debt had rose for the first time ever in our history during a time of peacetime and prosperity. But lawmakers were able to kind of wrangle it back into shape, and the debt to GDP ratio fell from something like 50% in the early 90s to about 34% by the end of the decade. Part of that was the direct effect of the tax and spending changes they made. Part of it was the impact of those changes on interest rates. It brought interest rates down. And part of it was that the 90s were a good decade in a variety of other ways for the economy. So that all leads us to the situation now. Uh, as of 15 years ago, the debt to GDP ratio was about 38% of GDP. That's not outrageous from historical standards. But then we had the great financial recession at the end of the first decade, and then we had COVID, and the two of those plus some gradual effects have put the debt to GDP ratio around 100. To make matters even worse, if you look ahead, you see the steady imbalance between spending and revenues. So the debt to GDP ratio is projected to go up to 166 in 30 years. And that's if Congress does nothing. If Congress extends the 2017 tax cuts that you mentioned or does other things, debt would go even higher. So the question is, when we look at this situation, we can definitely take heart from the fact that we've been able to reduce debt in the past, but we should be keenly aware that the things that we did in the past would not be sufficient to change the situation today. The problem is bigger. It's not caused by a war. A war is a temporary spending spike, and spending naturally comes down after a war. Right now, we've got permanent spending built in, and Social Security, Medicare, other forms of spending are growing. At the same time, it's not just a spending issue. I don't like it when people say that. It misses the fact that revenues are not going up very fast. It's kind of like asking which side of the scissors does the cutting. It's both, it's both the growth path and the revenue path that we need to be concerned about. But the spending and stuff like Social Security, Medicare, that's permanent stuff. That's not likely to come down the way military spending came down after the Second World War. So the problem right now is much more permanent and is larger than it has been in the past. And the point of the blog a couple of weeks ago was just to make that point and to say that, look, we've done this in the past, but what we've done would not have been big enough to address the situation now. So we can do this, but what it is we need to do is much bigger than in the past.